The year 1789 did not arrive like any ordinary turning of the calendar in France. It came like a storm gathering over a kingdom already trembling under the weight of injustice, hunger, and whispered rebellion. The grand palaces of kings glittered under chandeliers, yet beyond their gates the common people starved, their voices ignored for generations by a system that favored privilege over fairness. At the center of this fragile world stood Louis XVI, a monarch more uncertain than cruel, yet unable to control the forces that were about to erupt. Beside him, the elegant yet controversial Marie Antoinette symbolized the excesses of royalty in the eyes of the suffering masses. Bread prices soared, taxes crushed the poor, and the rigid social hierarchy, dividing society into clergy, nobility, and commoners, created a boiling resentment that could no longer be contained. The revolution did not begin in a single explosive moment. It began in the hearts of people who had endured too much for too long. When the Estates General was called for the first time in over a century, it was meant to solve a financial crisis, but instead it ignited a political one. The Third Estate, representing ordinary citizens, refused to remain voiceless. They broke away, declaring themselves the National Assembly, a bold act that shook the foundations of monarchy. In a tense and unforgettable moment, they gathered in a tennis court and swore not to disperse until a constitution was written, a vow that echoed like thunder across the kingdom. It was no longer about taxes or bread. It was about power, dignity, and the right to shape one's destiny. Soon, the streets of Paris became the stage for history's dramatic turning point. On July 14, 1789, the people marched toward the ancient fortress known as the Bastille, a symbol of royal tyranny. What began as a desperate search for weapons turned into an unforgettable act of defiance. The fortress fell, its stones shattered not just by weapons, but by the collective will of a people who refused to be oppressed any longer. This moment transformed fear into courage, and whispers into a roar. Across France, the revolution spread like wildfire, as peasants attacked feudal estates and demanded an end to centuries of exploitation. The old order was collapsing, and a new world was struggling to be born. The National Assembly moved quickly, abolishing feudal privileges and issuing the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, a powerful document declaring liberty, equality, and fraternity as the guiding principles of a new society. For the first time, the idea that all men were equal before the law became a national promise. But revolutions are rarely simple, and the dream of freedom soon became entangled with fear, suspicion, and violence. As the monarchy weakened, tensions rose between different factions, each with its own vision for the future of France. The royal family attempted to flee, hoping to find support and restore their power, but their capture only deepened the crisis. Trust was shattered, and the monarchy's fate became increasingly uncertain. Eventually, the king was put on trial, and in a moment that shocked Europe, Louis XVI was executed. The blade of the guillotine did not just end a life, it symbolized the end of absolute monarchy and the rise of a new, unpredictable era. Yet, instead of bringing stability, the revolution entered its darkest phase. Under the leadership of figures like Maximilien Robespierre, the revolution took a radical turn. Determined to protect it from enemies both real and imagined, the government unleashed the reign of terror. Thousands were executed, accused of betraying the revolution. The guillotine became a grim symbol of justice and fear, as neighbors turned against neighbors, and suspicion ruled daily life. It was a time when the ideals of liberty and equality seemed overshadowed by paranoia and bloodshed. Yet even in this darkness, the revolution continued to reshape France in profound ways. Amid chaos, new systems were introduced: education reforms, the metric system, and attempts to create a society based on reason rather than tradition. Religion was challenged, and the power of the church diminished. Everything that had once defined France was being questioned, dismantled, or rebuilt. It was as if the nation itself was being reborn through fire and struggle. But revolutions cannot sustain endless turmoil. Eventually, the people grew weary of violence, and the radical phase came to an end with the fall of Robespierre himself. Out of the ashes of chaos, a new figure would rise, Napoleon Bonaparte, who would bring order but also reshape Europe in ways no one could have predicted. Though his rise came after the revolution's most intense years, it was the revolution that made his ascent possible. The old world had been shattered, and in its place stood a new France forever changed by the events that began in 1789. The French Revolution was not just a political event. It was a human story of courage, anger, hope, and tragedy. It showed how ordinary people could challenge powerful systems, how ideas could be stronger than armies, and how the pursuit of freedom could come at a terrible cost.